Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. As predicted, I did not shoot or post this video as I had hoped about a month ago, but here we are at last. The end of the school year always makes me a little crazy with trying to wrap up various projects and whatnot, but this year, I also found myself working most of this past month of June when I was supposed to already be on summer break, which, as you might guess, has been just a little bit annoying. But thankfully, I'm now officially finally on break for at least a few weeks, and I really need to make the most of it. Just like a month and a half ago when I last made a video, I don't have a real weekly writing update to give because I've only picked away a tiny little bit at the current chapter, though progress has been pretty much minimal throughout May and then pretty much non-existent throughout June. Now that I'm free from work obligations for the moment, I will hopefully be able to reorient myself and put my attention toward writing as full-time as I can manage. And so in advance of that, I wanted to give a more thorough update on where I am in the book, then talk about how someone even chooses the length of a story and how you determine how many words you're going to shoot for. As of filming this, the project is currently at 112,735 words, with a smidgen of those coming in the past few days. Getting back into the swing of any creative project is difficult when you've put it down for some time, and it's only further complicated by the fact that creativity is not linear. Being on break and having the time to write doesn't necessarily mean I have the innate drive currently, but in order to not squander said time, I'm going to have to force myself to write as much as possible throughout the next 4 weeks. I'm currently working on chapter 15 and have been for a while. There are a couple of important character arcs of the emotional sort that are coming to fruition in this chapter, and I am also coming to what you might call the midpoint reversal, which typically leads into the characters' fortunes turning for the worse as they go throughout the center of the book. Since I write longer books, I like to structure the story as having both a midpoint climax and an ending climax. The midpoint climax should ideally put the characters in a worse situation, while the ending climax should see some kind of victory for the protagonists, even if there's a heavy toll for that. Leading up to my midpoint also includes two of the characters getting intimate for the first time, so we'll see how I tackle that subject matter, considering I have not written any sort of sex scene up to this point. However, I'm most likely going to take the Robert Jordan approach, where I have the scene focus on the buildup and the emotions involved, then cut to black for the actual deed, which is fitting since he's one of my biggest influences. But we'll see how it goes in the actual moment and see what I come up with as I'm writing and how I feel about it. Writing the middle of a book can be rather difficult, even for experienced writers, because most writers, whether a pure plotter or pure pantser, new or experienced, tend to have a clearer vision of the beginning and the ending of their stories. And you might have heard the term sagging middle used to describe a story that feels like there's a big boring stretch in the center of the book. Of course, what's boring is going to be different for everyone, but effective storytelling operates on a defined structure, which means your middle, particularly the midpoint reversal, needs to be just as impactful and satisfying as your inciting incident and your ending. Neglecting the middle of your book can lead to readers putting it down because they don't want to slog through several hundred pages potentially to finally get to a payoff. For this project, I have roughly 34 or 35 chapters planned. I must confess, I actually don't plan out the back half of the book fully until I've gotten about halfway through the project, because I want to make sure I actually like where I'm taking it in a certain direction before I put more effort toward outlining the last half of it. My overall word count goal for this book is 200,000 words, just like it was for the first book. With that then, considering where I'm at currently with the word count versus the chapters, is a bit of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it's great that I'm well over halfway on the word count goal, but I'm not even halfway into the outline yet. And since I don't have any intention to shorten my scene and chapter lengths, I'm probably going to end up with a 220 to 230,000 word project when the draft is finished. Obviously, that's a lot of words, and my slower pace these days makes it very daunting to even consider writing that much, but that's what I'm going to shoot for. The big thing I have to remember is that I have done this before, and I can do it again. I have written books before, I can write another one. And as you may have realized by now, I like to connect writing to exercising, and this is another prime example. I'm currently working my way back up to a 400-pound squat, and I'm incredibly nervous every time I take a heavy squat currently, And so I have to remind myself that I have done this before and I can do it again. And the same goes for writing a book. With all that being said, I wanted to talk about how I even decided on the length of the story in the first place. To do that, let's first talk about the different categories of stories based on word counts. This is for prose stories specifically, though I imagine there's some overlap with poetry stories, but I'm not a poetry expert by any stretch, and so I'm going to avoid talking about it. There are multiple categories for story lengths that are determined by word count, and those categories are a little arbitrary, and everyone will have their own opinions on them. From my cursory research, it seems like the most agreed upon categorization is as follows. We start with microfiction, which is anything that is fewer than 100 words. Then we move to flash fiction, which is 100 to 1,000 words. After that is short story, which is anything that's 1,000 to 7,500 words. Then we have novelette, which is anything from 7,500 to 15,000 words. However, some people list novelette as going up to 20,000 words and novella starting from there. Novella is the next category, which starts at 15,000 words and goes to about 40,000 words. But once again, some people might say it starts at 20,000, and some people might also say novellas go up to 50,000 words. And then finally we have novels, and novels will start somewhere around 40 to 50,000 words and go on up. Some people will list a novel as starting there and going up to 100 to 120,000 words, but obviously the problem there is that there is no category above novel. So anything from 50,000 to 500,000 words all still counts as a novel. At the end of the day, these are all marketing terms. Most people really don't care about a difference between microfiction and flash fiction and short story, or a difference between novelette and novella. And I don't either. So much like genre classifications, don't really get too hung up on the specifics. If you're submitting to a contest, you will usually find rules that give you a defined word count range, which then helps determine the length of your story. But if you're writing the story that you want to tell without constraints, you don't necessarily need to set a target length. For some people, just sitting down and writing and seeing what happens is the way to go. On the other hand, people like me prefer to outline the story before we begin. Outlining does not need to be a rigid process though, and mine generally begins as writing down a sentence or two for however many scenes or chapters I can think of to bridge where I'd like the story to start to where I'd like to see it end, and then I start fleshing out the pieces between. And as I said earlier, I tend to really only outline the first half of the book in earnest and keep the back half a little bit more vague until I get to the middle of the project. I then take stock of where I'm at in the story and whether I like where things are headed, and if not, then I adjust from there and leave some notes for things I'll need to revise in the first half to better connect then to the second half. But I also do that even if I continue on the path that I thought the second half was going to take, because you're always going to find things that you write as you go along that you're then going to need to go back and revise to foreshadow and properly set up. In either case though, having a general idea of how long you want a story to be can help you decide how intricate your plot is going to be and how many characters you want, how many subplots you want, because you have to juggle a lot of different things the bigger the story gets. You also want to take into account your target age group, as that will impact the length as well, depending on whether you are seeing this as an adult book, a young adult book, middle grade, a children's book, etc. Personally, I expect epic fantasy stories to be on the bigger side and to have a lot going on, so I settled on 200,000 words for each book in the Immortal Soul trilogy. That word count will generally give you a 500-ish page hardcover book, depending on the font size and style. I also have a lot I want to accomplish with the story and the characters. To that end, I have 3.5 POVs in book 1, then 5 in book 2, and I haven't really decided on the POV count for book 3, but there will remain at least those 5, and I'm considering a 6th and possibly even a 7th one, depending on where I decide to take the story and what I want to do with those characters I have in mind. If you plan to write from only one perspective, you can naturally have a shorter story, though once again, depending on the scope of your story, you can absolutely write a 1,000 page novel from one character's perspective. The Name of the Wind is a prime example of that. So the main question is, should you even really plan for a word count goal or scene length, chapter length at the outset of a story? In my opinion, the answer is maybe. It really just depends on what level of prep and organization works for you. Planning out scenes is a good idea regardless of the length of a story, even if you don't have a specific number of scenes in mind. In general, a scene should be a complete story in the sense that it has a beginning, middle, and end. And the purpose behind scenes is to effectively tell micro stories that build up to one big story. That doesn't mean a given scene will necessarily involve all of your characters, your plots, your settings, your themes, so don't feel like you have to tackle every single idea in every single scene, because writing a book is a marathon, not a sprint. But I think something really important to remember is that at the end of the day, your story's length should be determined by how you want to tell your story, not by marketing terms or publishing trends. Basically, don't give in to other interests trying to tell you how to write your story. Just write your story first and then see how it fits into the broader publishing landscape if that's the direction you want to go. Otherwise, just write your story and have fun with it. And it's gonna suck at times, and that's okay because that's part of the process. But I think that's about it for today. As always, thanks for stopping by. I hope this glimpse into a very small part of my process has been interesting, and if not, too bad. There are no refunds. Leave a comment below if you have any thoughts or questions about any of what I talked about today. Does all of this make sense? Or have I made the concept of choosing a story length even more confusing? If you liked the video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I do actually plan to post once a week or so throughout the rest of the summer here, which is really only like 4 or 5 weeks. So I will hopefully have more content to offer moving forward for a very short time at least. But as always, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you here in the next video.